Imagine this, a guitarist who previously stood quietly at the rear of the stage, his blonde locks cascading like a curtain as he drove Deep Purple sound for decades, now comes forward and lifts the veil off the deepest recesses of the band. Steve Morse, the maestro who became part of the iconic rock band in 1994, has finally spoken out. What the fans used to think was brotherhood has been broken today. Morse uncovers a war zone of jealousy and resentment, truths so candid they shatter the myth in a moment. In 1994, Steve Morse stepped into Deep Purple like a cool breeze after the hot and volatile Ritchie Blackmore stormed out for the final time. Fans rejoiced, critics applauded, and the band appeared to be infused with a new vitality, as if a long-endured storm had finally passed. But behind all those smiles and ovations, another tempest brewed in secret. From the very beginning rehearsals, Morse was conscious of the looming shadow of Blackmore, an intangible competition awaiting every riff he touched. Regardless of how able, regardless of how creative, he was forever branded as the outsider, the guns for hire who could never bear the responsibility of being original. Each of the crowd's applause sounded as though it was suffused with a shadow of comparison, warm on the outside but cold on the inside. Each conversation backstage had whispers of competition, careful reminders he was both invited and not invited simultaneously. It was the cruel dichotomy of fame and exclusion, victory on stage and isolation in the dressing room that characterized his earliest times with Deep Purple. Consider it, a band which already experienced blowout breakups, drug-fueled feuds, and acrimonious exits was expected to be revived with Morse at the driver's seat of the guitar. Far from revival, ancient sores boiled like open wounds refusing to heal. Ian Gillan continued with the resentment of his long war wit. With Blackmore, each note sang with residues of former fury. Ian Pace and Roger Glover, faithful custodians of the band's history but drained of energy due to ceaseless upheaval, usually stood in the middle, caught between fulfilling nostalgia and striving for something different. For Morse, it was as if entering an opulent mansion whose halls were haunted by specters. He had to battle not only for room on stage, but for a spot in their narrative, a narrative already composed in pain, ego, and betrayal. The burden of history weighed on his shoulders, reminding him with every rehearsal and every tour that he was stepping into a war zone dressed as a band. The specters of the past did not allow him to breathe, choking even the brightest flame of imagination with visions of bloodied rivalries and broken brotherhoods. The longer he remained, the more this became apparent. Deep Purple was not a family, but rather an assortment of rivalries held together by money, fame, and necessity. Each man tugged the band in a different direction. Gillan yearned for novelty and freshness, and Glover held fast to the security of tradition. Talk about a dilemma. You grew up in a little town, like me and all. Hi, here's the new folks in class. A wee Pace yearned for peaceful stability, but Morris boldly demanded modern flourishes that disturbed the others. Rehearsals would start out with laughs and friendships, but degenerate into arguments, the yelled voices ringing out louder than their speakers. Tours were not happy travels, but ego war zones with vendettas carrying over from town to town. Even deciding on a set list was an incendiary that set blazing fires raging, classics versus new, tunes, nostalgia versus progression. Fans only noticed the glossy performances, the screaming solos, and the beaming bows. But backstage, the warring was ruthless, cutthroat as shattered glass. Morse was caught in the crossfire, his allegiance questioned and his vision ignored, always reminded that he was outside the old guard and that each advance was a step into another covert minefield of resentment.
By the early 2000s, the cracks began to appear. On stage, the chemistry was perfect. A sound spectacle that deceived crowds into believing harmony prevailed. Off stage, though, there was silence over dinner plates, cold shoulders in dressing rooms, and an undertow of resentment why that weighed progressively heavier with each tour. Record decisions languished interminably because each member drew in his own direction, often refusing to bend. Recording sessions dragged on with incomplete takes, discarded mixes, and acrimonious fights over who would have the last word over sound. Morse, a perfectionist who loved making music deeply, was frequently shot down. His new ideas brushed aside in light of what the veterans held on to. He'd present riffs, full song outlines, even revolutionary arrangements to be shot down in the slightest hint of nostalgia. Meetings to generate ideas ended with doors slammed and words left hanging in the air like wisps of smoke. The same band that had once taken pride in reinvention was now choking under its own obstinacy, fettered to its past successes and too broken to carve a new bold course. There were battles behind the music too intimate for the fans ever to perceive. Tragedy, trouble, addiction, and family heartache all burdened the band, seeping into each note they played. Morse saw band members conceal their pain behind rock's veil of stardom, hiding personal heartache in out-loud riffs and insincere grins. Those wounds seeped into their music, spiking rehearsals in tension and recording sessions in unpredictability. There were evenings on which tempers erupted unexpectedly, fueled not only by artistic differences, but by profound personal irritations, disputes that started over harmony. Change might suddenly turn into acrid charges of disloyalty, money, or the past. Some of them bore the burden of shattered marriages, some fought with getting drunk while driving, and some fought the fatigue of constant touring that took away sleep and family from them. Morse, who entered in the hopes of being a bridge, wound up drowning in the tempest instead. He was both participant and observer, a quiet guardian of secrets he never asked to guard. Every unspoken battle became another weight on his shoulders, pulling him down, even as the crowd applauded louder than ever. On stage, the fans roared, the riffs flew, and Deep Purple appeared immortal. Spotlights shone on them in glory, and to the fans, they appeared like brothers, cemented by decades of music. But when the lights went down, Morse tended to leave the dressing room with a heavy heart. The unity fans believed in was only an illusion, a mask worn for survival. Band members traveled separately, sometimes booking different hotels, avoiding each other whenever possible. Off stage, silence replaced laughter, and years of bitterness followed them like shadows. Old grudges resurfaced during the small cent disagreements, whether over set lists, royalties, or creative control, and the tension was thick enough to silence an entire room. Imagine the scene behind the stage. Gillan alone, headphones on, world ignored. Glover, buried in paperwork, management over music. Pace, exhausted from refereeing fights, and Morse slipping quietly away, weighed down by conflicts that were never his, but crushed him nonetheless. The image of the invincible rock band was assiduously created for the world, but behind closed doors, the wars never ceased, and smiles were painted masks that covered years of scars. What Morse now lays bare is not merely a series of minor disagreements, but the reality that Deep Purple's legendary place in rock history came with a price. Fame saved the band, but harmed them. Rather than embracing new music, they hung on to old favorites, going back night after night to the same staples that had originally defined them but now bound them. The set lists were memorialized to the past instead of opened up as bridges to the future. Consider the irony. A band renowned for tearing down walls and innovating rock was now drowning on its own legend. Behind the scenes, members resented the routine, but dreaded the criticism of altering course. Innovative conversations frequently became dead ends, with Morse's contemporary ideas dismissed as risky or unbefitting the Purple name. Even victory had a sour taste. Every sold-out tour only further cemented the fissures for the music that earned them riches, also trapped them in nostalgia. Rather than holding each other as brothers in art, they endured one another for survival, dragging their name through decades of unspoken resentments and compromises. What had the potential to be a rebirth with Morse eventually became a fall into stagnation, driven by unfinished rivalries, hushed betrayals, and the suffocating weight of their own myth. And now finally, the silence is broken. Steve Morse uncovers the fissures, the tensions, the disillusionments, and the scandals, which Lou Sumoto live hived behind Deep Purple's glamorous facade. For listeners, it is a surprise to know that the group they adore was constructed on discord, not concord. For Morse, it is catharsis, an opportunity to reveal to the world what really went on behind the purple veil. He talks of years of bottled-up frustrations, rehearsals in which voices were raised above the amplifiers, and tours in which the camera smiles fell apart into long silences on the bus without words. He speaks of the heavy weight of being under the Deep Purple myth, in which each note had to struggle against the expectations, and each choice seemed linked to the past. The band's legacy had grown into a crown and a curse. Imagine this. For decades of sold-out venues and deafening anchors, Morse and his mates would frequently exit the stage going in different directions, not even willing to share the same passageway. The glory of their name concealed bruises of betrayal, struggles for power over money, songwriting credits, and resentments that would not pass. It was a house founded on shaky ground where even friendship was the sacrifice for the survival of the brand. Deep Purple's legend will always shine brightly